The Punisher is the newest Marvel Netflix series to grace our screens, and while I have enjoyed other ones, I was still a little nervous going into this one. I really liked the first season of Daredevil, as well as Jessica Jones. I thought that those were the peak for the Marvel TV shows, and the peak being the very beginning, it's not always a good thing. I did enjoy Daredevil Season 2 and Luke Cage a little bit, but this year they released Iron Fist and The Defenders, which both kind of left bitter tastes in my mouth. So I wasn't quite sure what to expect for The Punisher. I think the story structure is a little bit tired now. It always has the main story with the hero and crime organization or whatever, and then there's like the detective side story, and they usually overlap a little bit, but the detective, you know, they have mixed feelings about our hero, but they reluctantly help them out anyway and realize that they have a good heart. And it's kind of the same in here. It's kind of the same, and that's kind of been for pretty much everything since Luke Cage. And that being said, the direction this show took is unexpected, and this might be one of my favorite Marvel Netflix shows to date. I like how they get through his whole revenge plot line in the first 5 minutes, you know? So much of the Punisher his character is built around this revenge thing, and they really, by getting that all out of the way right at the beginning, it really leaves it open for more for the character, you know? It's not just a one-note character, oh, you killed my family and I want revenge on you. This show kind of explores, what do you do after that? How do you recover from life after this? I mean, you're no longer actively pursuing people that traumatized you, but what do you do after this? You're already an anti-hero, you're a run from the law, you faked your own death and everything. So what is that character going to do afterwards? And the show explores that brilliantly. Jonathan Bernthal gives a brilliant, Emmy-worthy performance as Frank Castle. I liked him a lot in the season of Daredevil he was in, but here he really owns the show, and he's fantastic. I'm probably going to say this name wrong, but Ebon Moss-Bachrach is great at playing the character Micro. I was worried when his character first enters, because you kind of understand, like, okay, I know where this is all going, his family and everything, it's going to be like this weird love triangle. And it kind of does it, but it turns it on its head, and it's not what you expect. You don't expect this, you know, Frank Castle to go in and like woo his girl, and then all of a sudden they turn into a big fight and he becomes the enemy. That's what I expected. But the relationship that they built between the Punisher and Micro is amazing. It's so complex and emotional, and you totally understand why these two people are similar and also how they differ. Like, Punisher got his family taken away from him. Micro, through his actions, has his family kind of distanced from him for their own good. The whole kind of central theme around this show is, are you able to recover? Is someone able to get this second chance to go back and get their family back? And obviously, Punisher, it's kind of lost for him, but he sees this chance with Micro, and that's what really bonds these people together. Similar things, but Punisher really wants to stop Micro from going down the same path he did, and, you know, embrace his family and love them and be with them while he can, and that's really heart-touching. Leaning into the world of fucked up family lives comes Ben Barnes, who's the actor you might have seen in Westworld, but he plays Billy Russo in this show, and he is Frank's old army buddy, and they were best friends, and they were practically family. They were practically brothers. And his reintroduction into the show with Frank and their dynamic and the backstory and flashbacks that we get really flesh out an amazing villain. I think a lot of the problem with MCU movies has been lackluster villains. I think the Marvel Netflix show has nailed villains, you know? I mean, this guy who eventually becomes someone that might be more familiar, but as Billy Russo in the show, he really is a villain up there on the caliber of Kingpin and Kilgrave. Then Luke Cage and Iron Fist kind of had shitty villains. But those two villains are fantastic, and he stands up there with what they've established in this universe already. Billy Russo not only serves as a great foil to Frank's character, but he also serves as a great counterpart to Detective Medina, who is the person that's kind of leading up the detective story B-plot in this show. and they have a great dynamic. There's this kind of relationship, but this tension as well, and we know as an audience going in what's happening, but she isn't quite in the know of it. And it really leads to some chilling scenes. There's a scene, I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a scene in the bathtub later that is skin crawling. It's really nerve-wracking. But along with all these themes of family and betrayal and loss comes PTSD. This show really explores PTSD and what it's like to go through these traumatic situations very well and very delicately. It doesn't paint it as just one side, but there's many different facets. Like, obviously, Frank has his forms of PTSD, not so much even with the war, but Frank is more so with the murder of his family and how that's affected him. But there's this other character that comes in, a young Marine who saw some shit, and now he's back living with his father, and there's this heart-wrenching scene between him and his father where he wakes up, and I don't want to spoil too much, but the way that they handle it, his father embracing him, it's very emotional, and this show really, really is probably the deepest, like, maybe the deepest comic book property there is as far as the emotion behind it, and it's fantastic. Well, it's obvious that I love the show and the performances and the themes that they explore. It's not without its problems. There's some things that I think were kind of big flaws and some minor flaws as well. It takes a long time before you really understand why we are seeing this Detective Medina subplot, and even then I feel like the show can almost be worked around if they just left her character out of it. I mean, she comes into play a little bit at the end, but not too much. I mean, she's not that pivotal of a role. I mean, for us spending so much time with her, she doesn't come into play enough, I don't feel like. They do kind of shoehorn in Karen from the Daredevil series into this show. They put her in very early in the show too, which is very out of place and weird, and there's no real reason to have her. But then she comes and plays a bigger role in another episode. But I feel like her setup from earlier in the show, as well as that young Marine that I was talking about, it was all lead up to this one episode that doesn't really fit in with the rest of the show. As far as the way it's written and directed, it's almost like a standalone episode just in the middle. It's kind of like if you saw Stranger Things Season 2, that episode of 11 in Chicago or wherever, where it's just out of place. It doesn't really make a difference in the grand scheme of things. I mean, there's some little plot points in, him and his reintroduction to Ben Barnes, who plays Billy Russo and everything. But it's overall, the episode is just kind of out of place, and you could have kind of gone without Karen, or even without that young Marine. Even though I like a lot of the stuff that they did with that young Marine, he doesn't play a grand role in the scheme of things, It's just kind of a one-off episode, and then after that he's kind of forgotten. And it seems a shame because they spent so much time setting up his character and making you care about his character, and it's not that fulfilling of a payoff. And overall, that one episode I'm talking about too is also just very directorially different, like in tone and everything. The way it's edited, it's made to be kind of like that movie Vantage Point, that Dennis Quaid movie that came out like 10 years ago. It's very much where it just replays an event, and it starts off after the event, and you don't really know what happened. I was kind of confused. I thought Netflix, when I was watching, skipped over an episode, so I was a bit confused at first. I had to go back and check before I continued watching the episode, because I thought I missed something. And it's just very out of place, and it's not a bad episode. I think it's a great standalone episode, but its placement into the series just kind of weirdly doesn't mesh with the other episodes. And I feel like overall that kind of contributes, that along with the storylines that lead up to that event that doesn't really matter. I feel like it kind of contributes to the show being a little bit bloated. The first episode is very off from the rest of it. I like the first episode as well. I like all the episodes in this series, even that one I was just talking about. I think they're great episodes, but they just don't necessarily move together quite well. I think a lot of the things, if you take out the first episode and you take out that one episode I'm talking about, I think everything else flows together well. I think this show would have benefited if they cut it down from 13 episodes to 10 or maybe even as few as 8. I feel like there's a lot of pacing issues with the show, and a lot of storylines don't really have a satisfying conclusion, that while I enjoyed what we saw from them, it just kind of muddies up the water and it kind of just wastes time in something that's not really important to the overall show. That being said, those are some minor issues in the grand scheme of things, because I think this show is fantastic. I think it's very emotional. I really like the themes that they explore. I think the character and the acting are fantastic in this, and I think it's honestly, if you haven't watched it already, you absolutely should. I'm going to give The Punisher an 8.5 out of 10. And if you enjoy the show, I'd recommend watching Jessica Jones. I know it's been out for probably 2 years now, but I don't think many people saw it just because it's kind of, I mean, I think the hardcore comic fans that are into the Netflix stuff really watched it probably. But I feel like it's a character that's not very popular and not really well known from the comics. It's not like Daredevil or Punisher or Iron Fist, you know, and yeah, don't watch Iron Fist. But Jessica Jones is a great show that is very kind of tonally in line as far as trauma goes with the Punisher. So if you haven't seen Jessica Jones, I'd recommend checking that out. They just dropped a trailer for season 2 of it. So if you haven't, that's just my suggestion to go watch. Anyway guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoy that, give me a thumbs up and subscribe, because I'm going to have a lot more reviews coming soon. Let's see, what do we have right around the corner? We got Star Wars Episode 8. The Last Jedi. I might release a Force Awakens review before that. Don't know if I'll have time. It's coming out pretty soon now. It snuck up on me. I'm hoping to do some reviews for other movies coming out, like possibly Lady Bird. I still haven't seen. I feel like it's been kind of out a while now, so I might not do a full review for it. Same thing with 3 Billboards Over Ebbing, Missouri, or whatever, the terrible title for a supposedly great movie. But probably Pitch Perfect 3, maybe. The Greatest Showman, maybe. You know, just subscribe. I got a lot more coming for you, so see you then.
I'm looking for Frank Castle.
The Punisher?
I think you know about my case.
Castle's the last witness. We can either clean this up or let him take us down.
They killed my family to get to me.